of you may wonder, why would you test an engine on a dyno with a muffler? Because of what I said. I don't know if I'm going to put this at the beginning or the end of the video, but towards the middle end of the video, I go into pretty good detail about exhaust pipe sizes and what it does, the effect it has on an engine, especially while the cam is in overlap. So a lot of times you'll test with mufflers because, one, when you're tuning the engine, it has such an effect on your intake signal, whether it's carbureted or EFI. So it's really not going to tune right when you do an engine that's going to have an exhaust system on it and you go tuning it without one. And then when you have an engine like a race engine that's not going to have an exhaust system on it, and then you go tuning it with these long skinny pipes, it changes the tuning drastically. So anytime you're tuning with a muffler, it's probably because the car will have a muffler on it, and that's the right thing to do. That's the proper thing to do. If you're running an engine that's going to be large tube open exhaust like on a racing engine, then you should not tune with small pipes on it. So yeah, if you see somebody testing with mufflers on it on the dyno, they're doing the right thing. Most likely the engine will have mufflers on it, and that's what you should do. Just wanted to clarify that. Welcome. So now, thank you for joining. And before we start, I did a video on oil ring control, and for the most part, everybody understood what I was saying. But just to clarify, sometimes when you put the scraper ring in, like here's one right here, on these file fit ring kits, you install them, and then all of a sudden they're really bound up and kinked, because they're way too long. If you look at a factory set of rings, like if you're doing a stock rebuild, you'll see that expander, spacer, scraper, whatever you choose to call it, you'll see that usually it fits perfectly. It'll have a slight bit of tension on it, but some of these file fit jobs, I mean, they are just really, they literally get twisted like this. And that's what I was referring to. Don't put them in like that. All right, now let's get started. So what are we talking about? We're talking about engine dynos. And I had I bought my dyno from Mark Smith at Pro Motors. I'm sure you guys know who that is. Lake Speed uses them sometimes. Now, not the dyno where he does all his oil and piston ring testing. That's a different one. But the dyno where he rebuilt his dad's, where they rebuilt his dad's cup engine and tested it. That's the dyno. That's Pro Motors out of Charlotte. You know, NASCAR has become like Microsoft, where they've locked everything down, and you know, it's just a few people now, a few companies doing engines, and where we used to show up and if you were in the rules and you were able to race, I mean, you could. It's just not like that anymore. So much has changed. But I mean, in PME, they've suffered too, big time. So everybody's had to venture outside, and even in the modified world, they've gotten the crate engine going now. You know, so they don't realize how they're hurting the small shops, NASCAR. But getting back to my point, that's where I got my dyno from, and it was a first class. Man, it was nice. I had a D-Pack system on it. I had every imaginable measuring device you could imagine or ever want. And when I went to pick up the dyno, again, this was 25 years ago, I noticed that there was two gigantic metal plates out back behind the building, and you know, pretty close to the building, we had these humongous mufflers. They were about probably 4 foot around in diameter. That was the mufflers to the dyno. And yeah, I said 4 foot diameter. Big boys. And I said, Mark, what's these big metal lids for? I mean, they're huge. And he said, oh, well, we put our water tanks for the dyno in the ground. Okay. This is something I actually never really paid any attention to. And so I asked him, I said, why are the water tanks in the ground? He said, because have you ever noticed when you dyno engines, as you go, that sometimes it gets hard to repeat? I said, yeah, I have. Because, again, I started doing dynos with, like I said, David Penix and those guys doing R&D on cup engines with Exeline products when I was 14. And he's like, well, the reason being is because the water temperature, as you run the dyno, the water tank temperature will heat up. And he says the warmer the water gets, the more it cavitates, and it changes your dyno reading. So if you sit there and dyno test all day long, your dyno numbers are going to change drastically due to the water tank temperature that the dyno's operating off of. So from that point, again, 25 years ago, I learned that the water tank and the engine coolant, I separated them. So I had inflowing cold water from the water lines to the building was separate. That was just for my the coolant part of the engine, and then the water tank had these 1,500-gallon big white, I guess Teflon looking drums that had the actual dyno water in it. And the other thing I noticed was, and pay attention here for this one because it will help you, is every once in a blue moon you go to dyno an engine and you go to make your pull and the engine would surge. It was just surge real bad. And what it was is we had these pickup tubes, the screens that go in the water tank would start to grow algae on it. Now I ain't talking about long strips of green algae like you're imagining. No, it would just be a really thin film that would get on that plastic screen that really, it was hard to even see it. And that was enough to disturb the water flow going into the dyno. So I learned that, okay, once in a while you go out there and take that screen out and you scrub it with a brush, put it back on, problem goes away. And I hear sometimes on YouTube or in other places you'll hear dynos do that. And that could be their issue, could be something else, but something they could look into if they haven't cleaned that in a while. Or if they have some kind of filtration system, it could be getting slimed up or dirty. So anyways, that's one thing. Now we're going to go over a series of things that will affect your dyno readouts and your testing you're trying to do. Because the whole point of dyno and engine, number one, is to get it the best it can be and to test parts. And it's really hard to get solid information from testing if you're hurting yourself. And that's the whole point of the video. So here we go. Okay, now this article can be found on enginelabs.com. And we're just going to start. I'm going to try to breeze through some of this. But basically, what can affect your dyno readings, your engine output? You got, regular temperature, whether it's water temperature, oil temperature. You have the airflow, the air temperature coming in. You have barometric readings. You have humidity, altitude. You actually have the torque calibration. I'm going to go over that real briefly. And also, not just the engine water temp, but the water temp of the dyno itself, the tank that holds all the water for the dyno. So basically, a typical water brake absorber is housed in a large circular steel case using water pumped under pressure into the housing. So if you ever go to a dyno room, you'll see these big electric pumps, and they're pumping water to the absorber, is what we call it. And inside that absorber, you have curved vanes, and they're on a rotor that's connected to the engine. The rotor spins because the engine is rotating. And it's inside of a set fixed of stator vanes. As the engine rotates, the water accelerates away from the rotor and the pressure is forced against the stator vanes where twisting motion is measured. Okay, and so this is where your temperature comes in. Anytime you push water under pressure at high speeds, the water gets hot, and I mean very quickly. So now this water, as this rotor spins, the brake is actually, the water brake is bolted to a rack, a big steel rack assembly. And if it were not bolted down, I mean, this engine would do backflips the moment you try and load it down. So the engine is trying to twist this brake. The brake is bolted down on one side. The other side is hooked to what's called a strain gauge. So as the brake is trying to pull away and actually rotate, the absorber, as it's trying to rotate away, it can't rotate away because the strain gauge is hooked to that one end of it, and then the other end is hooked to the frame. And so the harder it pulls, harder the engine pulls, and the more water they throw to it to stop the engine, it's putting that pressure on the strain gauge. So imagine you're hanging out of a helicopter and you've got this person by one arm, right? He's hanging on to your arm. Well, your hands, where they are connected, you're hanging on to that person. That would be the strain gauge. I know that's a weird example, but and the more the helicopter accelerates upward, the more pressure you're going to feel trying to hang on to that guy. Well, as you rev that engine and load it down, that strain gauge is feeling every bit of that twist. So calibration is extremely important, and it's really simple. You may also see, if you go in a dyno room, you might see this tall rectangular black looking box, at least ours always was, and it usually weighs between 100 and 150 pounds, and you bolt this little arm onto your water brake absorber, and it's usually a foot, maybe 2 foot long, and basically if it's 150 pounds on a 2 foot long arm, that is actually 150 times 2, that's 300 pounds of force on the strain gauge. And so you go in there to your dyno and you pull up calibration, if you have a nice digital one, and you just make sure it's calibrated. It should be reading 300 pounds. So that's the starting point right there, is making sure your dyno is calibrated. Now the reason why it's important is because the dyno actually reads torque, and it reads torque from the strain gauge. And then we have basically a mathematical equation that says, well, horsepower equals, and always work the parentheses first, right, when you're doing math problems. Torque times RPM divided by 5252 equals the horsepower. So it's pretty simple. And then, you know, computers can do that kind of math super easy, super fast. Now, when you get those numbers, that is observed power numbers that come directly off the dyno based on the atmospheric conditions that you have right then at that moment. Anytime you're doing dynos across multiple days, your days usually are going to have a little bit different conditions. Sometimes they're pretty dang close, but this is why we have correction factors. So that if I'm dynoing a day where it's 98 degrees outside with 80% humidity, which it does here in North Carolina, and then I might be testing in November or December where it's pretty cold and dry air, hopefully my dyno can correct for that, and I can see that my engine is either performing as usual, or I'm down, or I'm up. You know, that's the whole point of correction factors, so that you can be fairly consistent across different weather conditions. Now, this next part is very critical, and this is called standard temperature and pressure. And basically what that is, it's what a lot of people will do, like magazine articles and things like that. They will do what's called sea level air pressure, which is right here where I live, it's 29.92 inches of mercury. So anytime you see INHG, that is inches of mercury. Ambient temperature of 68 degrees Fahrenheit and 0% humidity. This condition will make an engine look very strong, but as long as all engines are corrected to this same standard, they can be accurately compared. An engine running on a 100-degree day with a pressure of only 29.12 inches of mercury and 70% humidity will produce far lower observed power than one measured at standard temperature pressure. Now, with that being said, a simple click on the dyno changes everything. I've been, one time I was on a dyno doing some testing for a big block engine, and I went in there and we were doing testing on an engine prior to the one I had done, so it was getting ready to come off, and I looked on the correction factor and it was 112% correction. And this was state-of-the-art Superflow. And I said, hey man, I said, why is that at 112% correction? And the answer I got was, well, you know, that's where we generally set them. Did not give me the inches of mercury or the humidity or anything. His just said 112%. And I thought that was kind of weird. So I definitely wanted to, like, well, is this, he just basically tested them all at that level, and that was his thing. I didn't do it that way. I had actually an airplane altimeter, and I had all the weather gauges that they use for aircraft in my dyno room, and we put in the inches of mercury and the temperature and all that stuff each day. And if the weather changed, we would change it at that point. So tried to stay up on that so I didn't fool myself. Now, this is another important one. The SAE, Society of Automotive Engineers, established a friction factor based on the size of the engine, with special attention paid to the stroke, since the piston travel represents a large percentage of engine friction. And boy, I'll tell you, that is a big deal. Your stroke has such an impact on your engine, and stroke has a lot to do with your cylinder head too. Whole nother talk there, but friction is not affected by the atmosphere. So the accepted procedure is to add frictional power loss to the observed power. So multiply by the correction factor and then remove the friction power from the result. And they're showing you how Superflow does it. So basically you have corrected power, and then they will take out what they consider to be the friction losses based on the size of the engine. And this is why when you, at least on the newer model stuff, now the old stuff, you didn't really, it didn't have much effect on it, but the newer stuff in the last 15, 20 years, it will accurately calculate the friction loss. But here's how you can fool that, okay? And this says good things about you as an engine builder. Basically, the friction loss is based off of stroke and piston travel. But what if you got that friction down to about nothing, you know, comparatively? So like if you were able to get your coatings and your hone right and your skirt right and your rings correct, think of the power that you're freeing up because you cut that friction down. And that's why I pay so much attention to that, because friction loss is a big deal. Now, the computer may think that you have this typical friction loss, but it doesn't know that you've all but eliminated it. See what I'm saying? So there's a lot there to be gained. Now, they made it a point here, and I think I should point it out, that the important part of the correction factors allow us to compare different combination tests on various days with a reasonable assurance of comparable numbers, despite atmospheric changes. It's worth noting the Society of Automotive Engineers changed the production engine correction factor in '93 to reflect normal operating conditions more closely. The new standard is a pressure of 29.234 at 77 degrees Fahrenheit and 0 humidity. This reduces the corrected power numbers by roughly 4% compared to the STP version. And you'll notice that where I live, at sea level, 29 point, gosh, I can't remember, it's a different number and a lower temperature at sea level and the old STP correction factor. So they've changed that now, and it should be a lot more accurate than it was. Now, I'm not going to get deep into this, but I really want you to pay attention here. The BSFC, okay, brake specific fuel. Now, this is a measure, and this is where a lot of people don't know what they don't understand it. This is a measure of efficiency, but it is often misconstrued as a measure of whether the engine is rich or lean. Thank you very much, Engine Labs. An engine with a BSFC of 0.52 does not necessarily run richer than one with a brake specific of 0.42. What it means is that the latter engine requires less fuel to make the same power. Okay? So don't be, try and figure out your BSFC and understand what it is. And if you don't do dynos, but maybe you get some done, this will help you understand what you're looking at. A derivative of this fuel efficiency rating is a related term called brake-specific air consumption. Okay? This is where airflow in CFM is divided. Remember the video where people say CFM is irrelevant? Yeah, it's not. This is where airflow in CFM is divided by observed horsepower. For naturally aspirated engines, it's common to use around 6 pounds of air to make 1 horsepower for 1 hour. At 500 horsepower, this means the engine is consuming approximately 3,000 pounds of air per hour. Now that's hard to imagine, right? We won't spend much more time on BSAC because it's not typical to see the air turbine used on most dyno tests. So I wanted to talk about the air turbine for a moment. If you ever see them put the hat on top of your carburetor or throttle body, now some of those have been gutted. Like I have one that just has a honeycomb in it to straighten airflow out as it goes into the carburetor. And then we have another one that's got the little fan blades in it, and you'll see wires coming out that we plug into the dyno, and that measures your airflow. It's called an air turbine. And the engine will make less power with the air turbine on, okay? Because it messes with, it reduces airflow going in the engine. So to see your peak numbers, most of the time, I say most of the time, if I put the air hat on with the fan blades, it does cut the power back. So, but if I'm running the air hat just to help channel air in straight, then it doesn't. It actually helps. Now here they're talking about that Superflow also has a BMEP. All right, now BMEP is brake mean effective pressure, and it's just another calculation that you'll see on a Superflow. BMEP uses observed torque multiplied by 150.8, then divided by the engine displacement. So like in a 6 liter, which is 346 cubic inches, for example, you can see they will take your 150.8 divided by this. Well, you multiply times your foot-pounds, then divide it by 150.8, divide that by cubic inch. You get a BMEP of 183.2 psi. Now, I want to point out that BMEP is only used as a comparison. It's not representing actual cylinder pressure. If your math comes out to 200 psi or more, generally that's only found in top tier stuff, NHRA, Pro Stock, NASCAR, for example. Okay, now here's one that is also a really big deal. In fact, it's a huge deal. And this is called the rate of acceleration. One that rarely gets attention is the dyno acceleration rate. All right, so when you're setting up your dyno, back like when I first started running dynos, all we had was a round looking knob. I mean, it was about, I don't know, it was probably about 6 inches around, and that was a manual control for the water brake, for the servo. That's how I would load and unload the engine. And so it became a balancing act of throttle and cranking that handle to apply water to the engine. And when you got to the peak RPM limit that you were done testing, then you had to very quickly turn the brake the other way and throttle back at the same time. And so you were working. It was a workout, let me tell you. And I, like I said, got real good at it and still use that one today. I still use the dyno like that. You know, the Superflow's automatic push button stuff is super nice. But what my point was, the handbrake deal, we control the rate of climb by applying water to it manually as it's accelerating. But with the new stuff, and like I said, this stuff's been out a while, you can change the acceleration rate. And what that means is, when you go to dyno it, you set the limits of when to start the pull and when to stop the pull. So that's your RPM limits, beginning and starting, or ending, right? So let's say I wanted to pull from 3,000 to 8,500. So I will go in there and start pull at 3,000, end pull 8,500, and then it's going to ask for an acceleration rate. And I can say 200 RPMs per minute or 1,000 RPMs per minute, but pretty much the standard is about 300 to 325, okay? And that's not too fast. I've heard guys say that you can pull engines on the dyno all day long, days and days and days, and it's no different than driving it. Well, that's true if your acceleration rate is not super slow. You know, if you're pulling your dyno at like 500 RPMs per minute, yeah, that's not too hard on the engine. But when you start getting on down to 300 RPMs per minute, that's not simulating driving conditions, guys. That is on the floor, and that thing is climbing very slow, and it is hard on the engine. So anyways, this is usually done at 500 RPM intervals, which I never pull one that fast. I'm always around 325 to 350 usually. But with the computer servo control of the water brake, a Superflow, for example, will run through an entire, say, 25 to 65 test range in as low as 100 RPM increments. So that's pretty dang slow, and that's really good. Now, the point of this is the longer, it's called dwell time. Let me put it this way. So think back to the beginning. We have a strain gauge. That engine is trying to rotate off of that platform, and the strain gauge is what's holding it back. So the harder and longer I pull on that strain gauge, the better my numbers are going to read. If I pull on the strain gauge too fast, then I'm going to have very low torque readings, or I should say lower torque readings. So if you load the engine down, you're on the floor, you hit start, right? You hit the go button on the dyno. Once it starts to accelerate, it starts taking all the measurements and documenting them on the paper, and it will start to climb at the rate that you set it at. So if you set it at 300 RPMs per second, I'm sorry, I said per minute earlier, but I meant per second. So if you set it at 300 RPMs per second, it's going to climb 300 RPMs per second. The computer will adjust the water brake and the servo accordingly. If you have dynos where you're running multiple engines or multiple tests, and you do one at 300 and one at 400, the one at 400 generally is going to have a lower reading than the one at 300. So you can, you can imagine why you would do something like that. Number one, maybe you don't want to be so hard on the engine, so you pull it a little faster. Number two, maybe, for whatever reasons. But if you're going to do accurate tests, they all got to be at the same rate of climb. And this is one that, it's a big deal to get accurate numbers. And then you'll have some people that do steady state checks, which is a great thing to do. So what that is you can go to a certain RPM. Let's say it's at 2,000. No, not that low. But let's say you go to 3,000 and you just hold it at 3,000. And the engine will record a torque and horsepower number right there. It's not climbing. It's just at 3,000. Then you can go to 3,500 and hold it there, and it'll record the numbers, and on and on and on. Those are called steady state pulls, and they're very accurate. Now we're starting to get to the point of this video. You'll notice that the little footnote here says, this is very subtle, but note the primary tubes on these big block headers. On the left, you have extend straight off the exhaust port. So you'll notice the header on the left side, the header comes straight off, looks like about 8 inches or so, as opposed to the right side where you have the immediate downward turn. All right, so do you think these two headers make a difference? You bet. And not only that, but look at how they've got this here. Notice the exhaust. You got a header there and maybe 18-inch collector afterwards. All right. Keep that in your mind there as we go along here. Anyways, it says the straight primary tubes tend to uncork more power. So the ones coming straight off the head will make more power at the top end of the curve as the comparison on the right. These are typical shorty headers with a very tight radius. You know, these are put in there for steering shafts and all kinds of other obstructions. The short tube headers tend to sacrifice low speed torque compared to the long speed. I mean, the long tube headers with the larger pipe and the straighter off the head, they're just better everywhere. Now, going back to the temperature of the engine, in this little article here, it says, we performed back-to-back tests and witnessed a naturally aspirated 400 horsepower street engine make 10 more horsepower by reducing the starting coolant temp from 180 degrees to 135. So just from the water temp alone was over 10 horsepower. Another trick that can go unnoticed is the configuration of the headers used in the test. For example, Westech prefers to use its own dyno room headers, not only because they allow easy access to plugs, but also the primary tubes extend horizontally from the engine. This straight shot from the exhaust port tends to improve peak power with no cost to low end power. It's a small thing, but it all adds up. Now, here's something I learned many years ago in NASCAR land, and that is one day everybody started cutting their air cleaners down, and look at the left and right air cleaner base. Okay, notice the one on the left is taller than the one on the right. Well, the one on the right makes about 8 more horsepower than the one on the left. Pretty crazy, huh? And also, I don't like these flat bases here. I like the one with the big arching radius. But, you know, I don't know. I'm going to have to go back and do some more testing on some of this. But, yeah, on a few cars that I built for, we changed to this style lid. We actually went in there and machined this down with a... we wound up putting it on a belt sander once we got it all cut down to get it back flat again. And yeah, 8 horsepower is 8 horsepower, right? Little things like that matter. Don't let anybody tell you that little things don't matter, because they do. And if you get a whole bunch of little things, it adds up to big numbers. Okay, so I've told you some things that will affect your dyno readings, your temperatures, whether it's air, whether it's water of the engine, whether it's water of the dyno cell itself, the air temperature coming in, the humidity, barometric pressure, all of those things, your calibration, all that stuff affects from one pool to the next, right? So here's one that is a big thing, and this is what I said in my one video about dyno wisdom. In the video, I said that you need to make sure your dyno is prepared to handle multiple changes, because some dynos have the same exhaust pipe, like 3.5 inch, and it looks like 3.5 inch all the way out, right? It might be 10-15 feet long before it goes into a muffler. And the reason that's a problem is because when you change from induction of different intake manifolds and different headers, or different headers too, and different camshafts, when the exhaust starts to back up in the pipe, and it will, when your horsepower gets high enough, it will back up. It affects your engine at overlap. So when both valves are open, the exhaust backing up will cause you to have low intake flow because it's flowing up in the intake. And I'm going to show you some pictures of how that we do it, and how NASCAR does it, and how top end guys do it, okay? And all it's going to do is help you. Anybody that tells you that exhaust systems don't matter, just go the other direction. Just go the other direction, because they're lying. So here we have Westex dyno. You all know Richard Holdner. There you go. There's a header, 18-inch pipe or so. I don't know exactly, but it's pretty dang close to that. Why is it like that? Because it matters. Now, but here's what I want you to see. Look here. Look behind it. Everybody see that pipe? You see this right here? In the background? That is the exhaust pipe for the dyno room. Now, that thing is a good, I don't know, 10-inch or so diameter. Those are the ones like we ran on our dyno, and every dyno I've ever been on, that's how it is. So we don't want any kind of exhaust system affecting our test. Some camshafts will need more exhaust than others due to the overlap. And that's why I say you can have a cam that might be great for the engine, but your exhaust system made it look bad. Okay? And these things apply when you have enough horsepower to make them apply. So once you start crossing over 500 horsepower, things start to change. And 600 is not the same as 7. 700 is not the same as 8. 800 is not the same as 1,000. All those horsepower require different things. All right. Now, I have 2 college degrees and, I don't know, a couple of master certificates, but here's the deal. You can figure out how much air your engine's pushing, and you can figure out how much capability that the pipe you have will flow. But it's also beyond that because of the heat involved. Does anybody know why we like to 100% ceramic coat headers, or why that if you have different metals in the exhaust that will change the way the exhaust flows? Did you even know that? You can go from cold rolled steel to stainless steel to Inconel steel to 100% ceramic coated, and it will flow different amounts. The whole point is the exhaust header, we want to keep the heat in the pipe, because the hotter the pipe is, the more air it flows. That is the reason. It's also very difficult to 100% ceramic coat headers, because it's really hard to get the ceramic to stick on the inside. And that comes straight from the coaters themselves. So obviously stainless or Inconel is the best thing to use. It's just expensive. I thought you might find this interesting. Here is a chart that basically tells you if you're at this power, this is what you need for exhaust. And I don't know if you can see that too well, but you can Google this here. But basically, if you're at, it has a street horsepower and race horsepower. And you remember my first dyno video, I said if you're doing like street car engines and stuff like that, this video, then these tests are not really going to affect you that much. If you're doing racing stuff, what I'm saying 100% affects you. 100%, okay? So right here on the left, if you're running race horsepower, 3.5 is done at 575 according to these people, 575 horsepower. Okay, if you're at 650 horsepower, you need at least a 4-inch exhaust pipe, and 4.5 for anything over 650. All right, and that's the truth, and that's why we run the pipes the size we do. For one thing, your little street engine might be going 5 to 6,500 RPMs, and my race motor is going to be turning between 8 and 9,000. So the airspeed, the velocity, the volume is a lot more than it is with that little street motor. Now this next thing I'm going to show you, because you know, I don't run these types of pipes on my engine test or my dynos. Like I said, we have our pipes step up really large, right, pretty much right off the header. So I'm not going to do this just to prove it, but the engine masters, they did, and I'm glad they did, because now I'm going to show you this video. They did a test on a 600 horse engine, right? 620 horse big block, not that high RPM, with 2.5-inch exhaust compared to 3-inch exhaust compared to 3-inch with 18-inch pipe. All right, and I'm gonna just let's watch this and see. So here we go.
Okay, we just took our engine that made 620 horsepower and turned it into a 600 horsepower engine, and we used to make, what was it, 580?
584 or 5 pound feet.
And we turned that into 556. Right now we're going to pull up the test with it on open headers with an 18-inch collector extension and no muffler whatsoever.
Okay, so they just lost 20 horsepower and I think almost 30 foot-pounds, putting the 2.5-inch exhaust system on. So, let's see, we find the one where they do the 3-inch test.
Decent torque converter.
The other thing that it's all on,
What?
is the exhaust system. That's the longest exhaust system I've ever seen.
It's all at wide open throttle. Not necessarily indicative of what you're doing on the street at part throttle, because if you're on it, you're going through 3,500 RPM really quickly.
Hurry up, Dave. There we go. Oh, shoot. Get it close up here.
Like decent torque. Engine, 556 pounds
Okay.
of torque, 600 horsepower. So now we're going to go put on the 3-inch and hopefully it improves that a little bit.
So they were at 620 and 580 on the torque, and now you see where they are.
It's got to. It has to. I bet it makes it louder. Right? Think so?
Oh, yeah. We can hear it loud.
Yeah, because it is depressing. We threw away 20 horsepower and how many pound-feet? 30.
30. Yeah.
You know, though, 2.5-inch exhaust, and we're throwing the 3 on right now, and we're looking to find our 620 horsepower again. Think we'll get there? No.
They got the 3-inch on there.
What we're going to do is run out there, and I need you to calculate the total volumetric difference in pipe. Exactly. Times pipe.
Now look at that. They put the 3-inch on, and they're up to 570 on the torque and 614 on the horsepower. Okay, so that's with mufflers. So exhaust doesn't matter, huh? All right, let's move on. Okay, now what they've done is, when you look at the blue line is a 3-inch, 18-inch extension on the header. So it's 18 inches on the header, an extension that's 3 inches in diameter. The black line is a 3-inch exhaust system, and the red line is the 2.5-inch. Like I said, you can go and watch this yourself. But with the 18-inch extension, they're up to 618.5, which is basically 619 horsepower. They're at 583 foot-pounds. So you're talking about darn near over 20 horsepower and over 30 foot-pounds of torque going from a 3-inch exhaust system to a 2.5. So imagine, again, this is just 600 horse. Imagine a high revving, higher horsepower engine, the benefits to that. And so when you're doing testing, that backup in the exhaust system, as it backs up, will change. It's going to mess up your induction flow because of overlap, because of the back pressure. And if you're doing all these different variables, such as the different intakes and different carburetors and different camshafts, that's when the exhaust system comes into play. So you don't want your exhaust system to interfere with your test, is what I'm saying. And like I said, with racing, it's extremely important. That's all I'm talking about is racing. I would never test a race engine with little tiny exhaust pipes that go all the way out. I just wouldn't do it, because that's not what the engine is going to see. It's going to completely change my carburetor signal, so it won't be tuned when I come off the dyno. I'll have to redo everything when I get to the track. It's going to change a lot of stuff. Where my torque is, where my torque ain't. Back pressure changes torque big time. Again, back to the overlap. That's why your torque would change. So I may decide that this cam that actually is really good is not good, because my exhaust system threw off all my readings. And that's the whole point that I'm trying to make, is that when you do dyno test and you're trying to learn what is the better component, you have to make sure the dyno room is freed up enough to allow you to do that. And that's why I'm showing this video. Now lastly here, I wanted you to see this. This is Ford Motor Company, research and development in Dearborn, okay? The guy says, the last water break I had anything to do with was with Heenan Fraud. It was good for about 800 horsepower. It had a 2,000 gallon water tank. It had a huge radiator and fan with about a 2 to 3 horsepower circulation pump. They tried to keep the inlet water temp to 32 degrees. If the water gets too hot, it can cause cavitation. We're talking about to the absorber. And when you get cavitation in your absorber, your engine torque and horsepower numbers completely change. All right. The guy says, have you ever been to Ford's R&D campus in Dearborn? There is an outdoor pool. Listen to this. There's an outdoor pool that looks like it is just landscaping. It's 300 by 500 in size. It's 20 feet deep. And it is the water tank for the dynos. It never freezes. Do you understand the importance of what I'm saying? It is such a big deal to keep the water temps stable and not get hot. And that's why people go through these extremes. Okay? I was told the other day, Lake Speed told me that one of the guys just got a brand new dyno a few weeks ago that was all the stuff done. Now, you know, this is everything, the room and the exhaust and the whole 9 yards. They have over $2 million invested in that. Now, guys, that is obviously extreme, right? But why would they invest that kind of money? Because it matters. So, in closing here, you know, I've been on the dyno for a long time, and I don't know. I hope you're learning something from this, and a lot of you are. And there's always those that don't, but I'm trying to help everybody. So all this stuff matters. Everything affects everything. I'm going to be doing a video soon on how to tune with camshaft lobe separation angle, and it's going to be really interesting for you, and something I've been doing for quite a while. So thanks for your support. Please hit the like button, and be seeing you soon.